How are you doing? Good evening and welcome to Dermot Power's Irish History blog. This is the first video that I've done since COVID, believe it or not. We're back in it, and in recent weeks I've had a few inquiries as regards Waterford ships during the famine. And I know nothing about it. I know about the famine, but regarding the ships, so I said, let's go to the man who knows everything about it, and that's Tommy Deegan. Now I have here a book called The Famine in Waterford, special famine edition of the Waterford Historical Journal, DC's. DC's is a brilliant journal. Every house in Waterford should be getting one. It comes out 4 or 5 times a year. Absolutely brilliant. And Tommy has an article on this, all about the shipping in Waterford, the names of the ships, the names of the captains, and when they left between 1845 and 1850. So that's what I invited Tommy along today to speak about the ships. Now, regarding ships like the Dunbrody, everybody says that, oh, the Dunbrody, that's when the Kennedys left New Ross on the Dunbrody. The Dunbrody also sailed from Waterford at different periods of time. So in order to find out what type of ships and how many ships that actually left Waterford, I'll hand you off to Tommy. Tommy, like we spoke before, and I was interested, you mentioned about ballast. Can you explain what that means, that if people were looking, say, what the difference between ballast and not having ballast?
Yeah, a ship would come in laden, would come into the harbour laden with all sorts of...
How do you mean laden? That means full of...
It would be laden with goods. You know, an awful lot of what was coming in was around 1845, when the government decided that, look, there's a problem here in Ireland, and it was mainly Indian maize was coming in on these ships. Now these ships were turning around, and they'd stock up the holds of the ships with stone or all sorts of rubbish, so that would balance the ship going out when it had no cargo.
That's out to sea, you mean, yeah? Yeah.
Now initially at the time, we went looking specifically for coffin ships.
Yeah.
That would have left Waterford. Yeah. And that was the premise for our project. And we were very, very disappointed. We found very nothing
from
Waterford that was going out. You see, you have to remember, people in those days were like ourselves. They wanted to make a fast buck. You know, they did. And anybody with a ship was bringing in maize. You've got thousands of people coming from all over the southeast on the quays. Now at that time, there was 2 ferries, as we'd call them, ferries. They were packet steamers, and the Malcolmsons owned them. And one of them was the Mars and the William Penn. Now, they were actually built in Waterford, down where is now the Marina Hotel. And they plied to Liverpool. And people were coming in to Waterford and availing of these to go to Liverpool. And there were thousands and thousands of people on the quays that were availing of this.
Yeah.
Now, if ships were coming in with maize and going out with nothing, it stands to reason that if there's thousands of people there, they've got money, let's go to the hook, turn the bows towards America and go. But we don't have any records of that happening.
So they were going to places like Liverpool and they were getting the bigger ships there. That's where the coffin ships were.
That's where the coffin ships were. And there was a lot of guys chancing their arm along the west as well.
Yeah.
You know, but these ships didn't seem to, unless they were going out under the cover of the harbour board, the customs, etc. You know, but we have absolutely no concrete evidence.
So what you're saying, Tommy, in effect is this, is that the people on the quays of Waterford who were waiting to get the Waterford ships were fairly well off. They could afford.
They had to be well off, and the ships that we found were, vast majority were Quaker owned, and these ships were converted, and they were a very, very high price to go. And what was very interesting was they wouldn't have put these ships on the routes that they put them unless there was demand.
Yeah.
You know, the Quakers were very business savvy.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of these ships went to St. John's, New Brunswick, Canada.
Yeah.
One or two
Yeah.
would have went to New York.
Yeah.
But you see, where there's problems in New York now that we can find what came in to New York in this period,
Yeah.
they're all coming from Liverpool.
Yeah.
So we are really at a loss to know what was coming from Ireland
Yeah.
at that time, because they were using these ferries. It was a staging port for the Irish. But to get back to Waterford, the ships that went out, they went out seasonally, maybe from April as far as the end of September, when the weather, they weren't going to hit massive waves on the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And these ships were very expensive. They were kitted out. Everybody was fed. They were big ships, and everybody got to their destination.
Yeah.
Perhaps, obviously, one or two. I didn't check Lloyd's to see that any go down, but they were ploughing the Atlantic maybe 2 or 3 times a season.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a 5 to 6 week journey over.
I was looking at the 1845 list, Tommy, that you produced, and there was a fair old smattering of ships, but from then onwards, as the famine worsened, there was a lot more ships in 1848, 47, 48. It almost doubled in the amount. But as you said about the Quaker ships, as we call them, 3 meals a day on them, kitted out. You had your own cabin. You weren't sleeping on the deck like on the coffin ships. They just stuffed it. It was like modern day trafficking from Europe and that. They were just packing them on. Didn't care how they got there.
Yes.
And but the Waterford ships were an exception to that.
They were an exception to that. And I mean, we look at the Dunbrody today. Oh, the conditions were cruel. They were cruel. We're looking at the Dunbrody through the lens of a 21st century lens, looking at the 19th century.
Yeah.
And that was luxury ship at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they say, oh, the conditions were terrible on that. The conditions were very good compared with, like, there's bunks on that.
Yeah.
We didn't have bunks on these coffin ships, these famine ships.
Yeah.
Straw was put down. They didn't care what condition people were in going on. So cholera would have swept the ship.
Yeah.
Crew and all, the ship was out of control and it sank. Everybody was dying of fever.
Tommy,
but we couldn't find anything or any hint that any of these left Waterford.
Yeah.
And it was top of the range. And what else we noticed, the Society Friends, the Quakers, they were business people.
Yeah.
And they answered a demand. So there was obviously a demand within Waterford for Canada.
Yeah.
And a vast majority went to Canada. Now, we had a man, Larry Forrestal.
Yeah.
And he was going to New York.
Yeah.
Now, Larry Forrestal is famous for the knock over Ferrybank. It's known to local people here, and the older people watching, Larry's knock.
Larry's knock, yeah.
And he had his own ships.
Yeah.
But he was ploughing for New York.
But just to stop you, Tommy, there for a minute, for those people who would remember, actually the building is still there, the Ardery, that was built on Larry Forrestal's house over there, and that's it. But he was also an older man, I think, at the corporation.
He was an older man.
Yeah.
He was very wealthy man.
Yeah.
And he built his little castle there. There was a beautiful replica castle there. That was his house, overlooking the town.
One thing, Tommy, I think that needs to be done, and that is to acknowledge the contribution of the Quakers in Waterford. It has never been really officially, in my opinion, properly and officially recognised as the contribution from that period. The founders of Waterford Glass back in the day, Quakers. You have the Quakers with the ships, again Quakers. The Malcolmsons of Port Law, again providing all those jobs. And they were the mercantile cream of Waterford. Has never been really fully recognised in an official way by either the government or by the city council. I think it needs to be done.
Nobody. And I mean, the things they done. the things they done around, they provided soup kitchens around. You see, Waterford, at that time, the indigenous inhabitants of Waterford weren't affected by starvation.
Yeah.
It was the people that came in from the hinterlands around.
Yeah.
And, you know, the workhouse was overflowing. They had nowhere to go. You had thousands of people coming in for the steamers to go to Liverpool, maybe Bristol, you know, places like that.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I'll ask you, did that workhouse overflow, Dermot? And were other, what was their answer?
It did overflow. There were auxiliary workhouses around Waterford. There's one in Michael Street. There was one in Hennessy's Road.
Really?
And the fever hospital wards in the fever hospital were used. Oh yeah, overflowed most definitely. And like Therese, I have it in my book, The Streets of Waterford. The conditions up there were absolutely atrocious, Tommy. You know, absolutely atrocious. But it's the poor have to go, as you said, on the Mars, on the steamers across to Liverpool to get the coffin ships. But
yes,
there were no coffin ships went from Waterford.
Well, there may have been steamers as we have today. Like, people in them days were the same as us, make a buck.
Yeah,
they had the same feelings. They had the same priorities as we do today. But you see, there could have been dodging the customs. They could have had 200 or 300 people on, get them to Liverpool. Who'd know?
Yeah.
But I can't find anything concrete on that.
Well, that's good news for Waterford.
It is.
It says something about the people here,
But the Quakers owned the majority of the boats. Now, those boats were upwards of £12. At that time, that was huge money to get a berth to Newfoundland, New Brunswick, you know, St. John. These places were, but they wouldn't have put on those sailings to those routes unless there was demand in the city for them. And obviously the hinterland of the area of Waterford.
And Tommy, you referenced about that most of them went to Canada, and I presume that's because Canada was a big country. There was a lot of land available to people who had a few bob to go over there and buy land and set themselves up for life.
Yeah, and also, like, there was a tradition of Waterford back from literally the whole 18th century, the 1700s, where they followed the herring and settled there. So these people that were looking to go to Canada had relatives over there.
Yeah.
So, like, they were going to their own people. They had the money. Maybe the money came from Newfoundland and Canada for these ships, for these people.
Well, we can see that now. I know the Carneys, like the present Prime Minister Carney, he's over in Ireland at the moment, and his people came from Mayo, but not that they didn't go over that far back. I think it was in the early 1900s they went. But as you say, Tommy, you go over there and it's full of Welches, it's full of Powers, it's full of all Waterford names over in Canada, and particularly around the Newfoundland area.
Oh, absolutely. I remember some years ago, the late broadcaster in WLR, Billy McCarthy.
Oh, Billy, yeah.
He went over to Newfoundland and St. John and all those places, and he was fascinated by the Ballybreaking accents over there. Yeah. and the Cayleys and everything, you know. He just couldn't believe it. And the names, the O'Keefes, the Powers, all the names were there.
I remember, Tommy, when we were in the library back in the 90s, and there was a family came into the Waterford room, and he was trying to find his people here in Waterford, and they were from Newfoundland, and he came in and he said hello, and I said, how are you doing? I said, you know, and he had two daughters with him, and their mouths were open. Said, oh my God, they talk exactly. No, they didn't have Waterford accents, the girls. But the father did, most pronounced Waterford accent. Yeah. Well, Tommy, listen, thank you very much for that and that explanation, and to the people who actually contacted me about it. This was the Deeseys, Tommy, sorry, 1 second. Yeah. And this is the Famine edition of the Deeseys. Now, there's also a book, and you'll get them in the library and to take out. This is a book on the famine in Waterford. And again, I have an article in this myself, and they're excellent books. If you want to know anything about the famine in Waterford and the Quakers and that and the workhouses, they're all in the journal here, and also in the famine in Waterford. Until we meet again, slán go fóill.
Slán lads.